Hi, Ammar. How's it going?
Hey, it's going, man. How about yourself?
Usual. So,
Yeah.
part two of our teammate wars. The big one, as it were.
Oof.
Ferrari, Lewis Hamilton versus Charles Leclerc. The the one that we can't ever decide on. We did this one a year ago, and we needed to get my wife to adjudicate and give us her answer. Um, This time, we have no such recourse. I cannot get any spousal advantage. We're just going to have to battle it out for ourselves. Or maybe we'll agree. Who the heck knows? Lewis versus Charles. Amar, I'm going to let you start and then I'm going to
Yeah.
hijack. So let's go.
Yeah, and I have a lot to say, but let's sort of set the table, right? And when we're talking about a seven-time world champion in Lewis Hamilton, a guy who transcends the sport, has transcended himself to a team that's transcending the sport as well. So Ferrari are synonymous with Formula One, and you could say the same about Lewis Hamilton for all but most of this last decade. And so this is you have a guy with as many credentials as he does. We've spent last week talking about what Lewis Hamilton means to the sport, and certainly at this age. On the other hand, you have a Ferrari stablemate in Charles Leclerc that has been gradually getting better and better and better. And I think that last year he sort of turned the corner around. I want to say after the middle of last year, particularly after Monza. Sorry, after Monaco, I should say. And Monza was one of those races where you and I sat here and said, wow, this might actually be the coming of a future champion, finally sort of figuring it out. Unfortunately for Charles, the Ferrari hasn't quite figured themselves out for the last few years. And so his results have partly been marred by that. So this is a tough one to pick, right? And I've done some research around social media and in the news, and the verdict is sort of 50-50 thereabouts. Some people give Lewis the advantage because he is a seven-time champion. He's commanding the sort of the attention of the team. On the other hand, Charles has been with the team ever since he was essentially a baby. And I still remember this clip of Charles in back then Alfa Romeo Sauber standing outside the garage with Lewis Hamilton in the back and on a rainy day. I can't remember which circuit that is, but if you're on social media, you'll find it somewhere. Anyway, my point is that given what I've seen last year, and I'm going to be fair to both drivers, given that in our last debate, I sort of alluded to last year as well. I think that Charles has the edge over Lewis. I really do. And I just got done saying what he did in Monza was pretty epic. It was a drive of the champion of a champion rather, and I would assume that since nothing has changed, the car is not radically changed. Although Ferrari has made some changes this year, Charles is pretty up to it with the car. I have to say that looking at Lewis in testing, it didn't quite look like he was in sync with the car as well. And given that we're headed in a year where all the top three teams that are competing for a championship will have to put their eggs in the one proverbial basket, I really feel like Charles has it to take that quick lead from Lewis Hamilton. And although I do believe that Lewis will get stronger as his time at Ferrari increases and he sort of gets a chance to get settled into stuff, I think that Charles has the lead. And so if I were sitting here today, I'm going to pick Charles as the guy to beat at Ferrari.
He certainly is the guy to beat because he's there. You've got to beat your teammate. So if Lewis is going to win an eighth championship, which is what he's set out to do, well, then he's got to beat first his teammate and then whoever else is max shaped in another car somewhere else. But the big question is, can Lewis do it? And I think I'm gonna try and come at this slightly differently to how we normally do it, right? So I think there's two things we need to look at. The first is the last three seasons at Mercedes, Lewis has quite vocally said that he hasn't got a car that he particularly gets on with. So the first question to answer is, does Ferrari provide him with a car that he is better able to exploit? Now, we did a video on this a little while ago, just to highlight the way that Lewis likes to attack a corner versus the way Charles Leclerc likes to hustle the car. just to see if there was anything in the way that the Ferrari was at the end of 2024 that might give us some clues about how Lewis might fare when he gets in that car. Well, we've now had pre-season testing and we've got a bit more information. We've got, first of all, what the two drivers said when they got out of the car. Lewis has been sort of cautiously optimistic about about how he feels about the car. He's constantly been saying, "Look, I'm happy with the team. I'm really looking forward to this challenge. The car is doing what I want it to do. It's the best feeling I've had in pre-season for a long time," right? Versus Charles, who's been much more guarded, much more, we've got work to do. I don't quite have the feeling just yet. And, this is pre-season testing. All of the caveats that we normally have apply, plus the fact that Lewis is coming from a car that he really doesn't like to something completely different. So, when you really don't like something new is going to be good, right? We've got some telemetry though. So just to put some bones on that, I wanted to look at a few corners. So probably the laps to look at that are most comparable are day 2 of pre-season testing. Charles was in the car in the morning. Lewis was was it the other way around? I think Lewis might have been in the morning and Charles was in the evening session. And they both did a couple of laps on the C3 within a second of each other. And Lewis was ever slightly faster, but I do want to highlight what this car allows him to do that might have given him a bit more comfort with the car than what Charles was able to do. And I know this is early days. They're going to have an entire run in the sim, but it's all I've got. So I'm going to show it to you anyway, right? So this is turn 4. So Bahrain, you come down the pit straight. You have the little right left jink, another straight, and then into turn 4. That's where Max and Charles were doing their DRS chicken in 2022. So into that corner, there's already a bit of a delta. So the delta line, Lewis did the fastest lap. His is constant. Charles was a bit slower, so you can see his white line above Lewis's red line, and as they go through that corner, Charles' delta goes further away from Lewis's, so he doesn't take that corner as quickly as Lewis does. But how does that actually happen? Well, Lewis, you can see on the brake trace, the one right at the bottom, brakes really hard, aggressively, and for longer than Charles does. So although he brakes slightly earlier, he keeps his brake pressure on for longer than Charles does. Charles overlaps much less into the corner, so you can see that Charles doesn't hit the brakes until his throttle trace is right at the bottom of the trace, like he's taken his foot completely off the accelerator, and then he started to brake, whereas Lewis overlaps them a bit more, and on exit it's much more pronounced. And you can see it if you look at the throttle and the brake trace overlapping each other. You can see that Lewis has still got the brakes pinned while he's accelerating out the corner to try and get the car turned round a bit more aggressively. That's just in turn 4. I think they do it again in turn 9, and in turn 9 it's actually much more pronounced. So turn 9 and 10 in the right at the end of or right at the beginning of sector 2, I think it's that awkward left-hander where they go downhill and then it tightens into a big left-hander. They head off down the straight where there's a bit more DRS. Really tricky corner, and I think this is what was catching a lot of drivers out. Here, Lewis again overlaps aggressively his brake and throttle inputs on the way into the corner, and then again on the exit to the corner, whereas Charles may overlap a little bit on the exit to try and get the car exiting how he wants it to, but on the way in, when he's setting up the car, it's much more pronounced. The disparity between coming off the throttle and hitting the brakes is not so much of an overlap. That's the classic way that you're taught how to drive when you get into go-karts or cars, that you shouldn't have an overlap. There shouldn't be any gap between coming off the throttle and getting on the brakes, but the overlap isn't always what you want. But Lewis really likes that aggressive turning. It's what he's wanted to be able to do. at Mercedes, and the car's not allowed him to do it. And when he has done that, all that's happened is that because of that sharp transition into oversteer, he just heats up, lights up the rear tyres, doesn't have any tyres at the end of the lap. Does that happen here? Well, not quite so much, because even in the final corner, and this is the final corner at Bahrain, again, Lewis is able to maintain his pace even into the final corner, suggesting that both into and out of the corner, he's maintained his rear tyres in a way that he wasn't able to do at Mercedes. So the conclusion that you can kind of draw, or at least that I've drawn from that, is that he's much more comfortable in this car. It allows him to drive how he wants to. Now, I'm not saying that that he's going to have an advantage over Charles for the rest of the season. All I'm saying is that the gremlins that were holding him back at Mercedes don't seem to have followed him over to Ferrari quite as much, and that gives me a bit of hope. That's the first part of it. There is a second part, and this is the bit where I think, Ammar, you're going to want to get involved, right? So the question is, okay, can he take that comfort with the car and become the Lewis of old and beat Charles? Does Charles, however, have an ingrained advantage? One being the so-called quickest in F1 over one lap of anyone, and I'm going to contend that point in a second, but also the fact that he has more comfort with the team and how they function. Because it's all well and good Lewis being comfortable in the car and it doing what he wants it to do. He also needs to be able to bring that to bear to beat his incumbent teammate. So that's the question that I'm trying to ask you. Because Ammar, I think your argument's going to be, well, he didn't do very well at Mercedes and he's coming here as a wounded warrior. So how is he going to do very well against a pumped up best season of his life, Charles Leclerc? I think that's where your argument's going to go. Tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, well, I think that's where my argument is going to go. But I do want to kind of go back to your testing observations. And you did quote Charles, but he did kind of throw in a caveat there, which was that the weather was not very favorable when he was out there, particularly because it was cooler temperatures. And so there's a little, so this kind of goes back to take what you will out of testing, right? And I think that the testing is such a small sample size, and given this year's conditions, I'm not even sure we would do that. I mean, even if you thought that McLaren was going to be dominant, which we think they are, there's probably a little bit of caveat to be thrown in there. So I don't fully buy that in and of itself as an argument, but I do agree with you that if Lewis Hamilton is feeling a lot better with the SF25 compared to the last 3 years at Mercedes, that generally bodes well. I could also argue that there's been 3 years of essentially not being relevant. So there could be a little bit of a rust factor in there too, because yes, he's got the 2 wins in there. There's some, but there's been so few and so far in between, right? So I don't know. I don't know what, I mean, you can kind of split that either which way that you want to. I would agree with you on your second point, which is that Leclerc having been in the team with having developed the SF25 to the point that he has, along with Carlos, I might add. So a quick shout out to Carlos there. If the SF25 is going to be any bit better than the SF24 was, I think he's got a role to play in there. We certainly couldn't attribute any of the development to Lewis, right? I mean, we're just going to be fair here. But I think that again, what you have with Charles already there is momentum. And by the way, we're talking about Lewis Hamilton joining Ferrari. I mean, we have talked here about this, and the history is available, right? History is not essentially in Hamilton's side, right? He's got to look at his old foe in Fernando Alonso and Sebastian Vettel as examples of previous multiple championship winners that have not succeeded at Ferrari. So there's a little bit of that. And I would also add that while we're talking about this being Lewis versus Charles, you cannot ignore the fact that we think that the McLarens are ahead in that
But
you
we're
have two
yeah, but we're
drivers there,
not.
and Red Bull also are in the
But
mix.
we're
So
not talking
this
about the
is,
championship. We're
I
just
agree
talking
with you.
about
I
these
just said
two
that.
head to head.
I know, I just said that, but you cannot just simply ignore that, right? Like that's what I'm saying. It's not like they're just two of these guys going on a racetrack and racing each other. There are going to be elements of that that'll play out, and I just think that Charles is much better prepared to take care of all of that, given that he hasn't had to make the change. Now, of course, I will say this. The enthusiasm that we've seen in Lewis Hamilton is something we haven't seen since the end of the 2021 season. And so I think there's some merit to be put into that as well. And I know it's not essentially a home race, but it's kind of that phenomenon, right? If you have engagement and enthusiasm that has not existed for the last 3 years, there's probably what do you want to call it? A half of a tenth in there, or a tenth in there, maybe, right? So there might be something to that effect. But Shez, you talked about the last 3 years at Mercedes, and Lewis Hamilton hasn't been a good qualifier in this generation of cars, and I think that is where the Achilles heel lies, and that's why I brought in the other competition too, right? You're talking about qualifying head to head against Charles, but you're also going to have to qualify against these other guys that are also going to be going at it. So it is not going to be easy for Lewis if he hasn't quite fixed that, and we simply just don't know how he's going to do it. Now, he might be really good. He might even come out ahead of Charles, so for all I know. But at the moment, having seen zero racing or even a free practice that has any credibility to it in terms of a race weekend, it's hard to predict that Lewis would qualify better than Charles.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's have a look at some numbers.
All
So,
right.
Lewis Hamilton has not been qualifying well in 2024. There is no question about that. If we bring up his numbers versus George last year, they are crushing. Like he
Yeah,
was
19 to 5.
19 to 5. It's nuts. But that doesn't tell the whole story, does it? Because if we're going to go backwards a little bit throughout the entire ground effects era at Mercedes, where essentially he's not like that car the entire time. He beat George in their first season together in qualifying, head to head and pace. But you could say, okay, fine, it was George's first season at Mercedes. It's just bedding in, blah, blah, blah. But there was all that nonsense about, oh, he's experimenting at the beginning of the season and he doesn't, he's not even getting out of Q1 in Saudi. Turned that around though, didn't he? Season 2, 2023, yes, they're much closer, but he still evens the score head to head and is ahead on pace. And the only season in which George gets ahead of him is in the season where Lewis has announced he's going to Ferrari and suddenly doesn't quite have the upgrades at the same time that his teammate doesn't have access to the same briefs and debriefs that his teammate is getting access to. It's not quite the same. Now, I'm not using that as an excuse for everything that happened in 2024.
Can I quickly ask you something though?
Yeah,
In
sure.
22, you mentioned that he did better than George in qualifying. Tell me who finished ahead in terms of race positions
Right.
for that season.
So I like how you've obfuscated my question, but that wasn't the point of this. We were specifically
But
talking
my
about
point
qualifying.
is,
We're
okay.
specifically talking about qualifying. I'll let you finish, man. Let me finish my point. You specifically were talking about qualifying, so I'm going into qualifying. And the races, in terms of points, across the entire 3 seasons, didn't Lewis get more points? Didn't he finish third in the championship in 2023? Has George come anywhere near to that level of podium troubling championship contention? He has not.
No, but George Russell is no Charles Leclerc either. So,
Okay, so that's the other point, right? So what I'm saying is that Lewis actually did better in qualifying than we're giving him credit for. Let's talk about Charles. So Charles, since 2021, has had a constant teammate. He's had Carlos Sainz in the car alongside him. 2021, the difference between them was a tenth. In 2022, the difference between them was a tenth and a bit. But from 23 and 24, the difference was less than half a tenth of a second in pace across those two drivers. Now, I would argue that Carlos Sainz is no George Russell when it comes to qualifying. And yet, he was able to get to less than half a tenth away from the quickest, inverted commas, driver in F1 right now. And if you don't believe me, regarding Carlos's pedigree, let me rewind a little bit. Carlos, in his first season, was up against Max Verstappen, who beat him on pace. He then moved to Renault. He was up against Nico Hülkenberg, who is a bit of a veteran, beat him on pace. He was then up against Lando Norris. Lando Norris in his rookie season in 2019, who beat him on pace in both seasons across qualifying. So my argument that, Charles Leclerc, quickest driver over one lap, needs to be couched a little bit in the fact that he let a driver that was beaten by Lando Norris in his rookie season and Nico Hulkenberg at Renault, he let him get pretty freaking close, where Lewis Hamilton was able to out-qualify in the head-to-head in 22 and on pace in 23, the guy that stuck a Williams on pole, not on pole, but on the front row in Spa in 2021, was able to whack his car into Q2 when it had no reason to be there throughout 2020 and 2021. And also, as soon as he jumped into a Mercedes, the first chance he got to less than a tenth of a second away from Valtteri Bottas, who had been in that car since 2017. Then we're not comparing apples with apples here, mate. So that's why I think when you really go back and look at the numbers, I think the advantage that Charles is perceived to have and how bad Lewis has been in qualifying, I think has been a bit overrated. And if he now finds himself in a car that does what he wants it to do, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion, even in qualifying.
So you are a savant when it comes to Formula One numbers, but you just said something here that caught my attention, which is the numbers don't bear it out. And here's what I would come back to you with. When you select numbers, as in the ones that you talked about in terms of being quicker than Carlos, that does not necessarily translate into results, right? So that's why just giving that one statistic by itself does not help. Let me give you some more statistics since we're right there, right? In the time that Leclerc and Sainz were together, race laps led, Charles,
No idea.
almost 2,800 laps, and Carlos has 1,000 less laps. Qualified ahead, that's a 3:1 ratio. Classified ahead, again a 2:1 ratio. Laps led, again a 2:1 ratio. You can say that Carlos was within, what was the percentage you gave?
Was within
Half a percentage. That's great, but
half
the
of a
results
tenth.
count too. Okay, half of it. Let it be half of a tenth, half of 1,000, whatever. But the results count too. Wins count
Okay.
too. Polls count too. All of these things count too. It's not just one statistic. So I would agree with you. Look, if your argument is Lewis Hamilton is better than Carlos Sainz, fair enough. But in the same time that Lewis Hamilton and Carlos Sainz were racing together at these last three seasons, Lewis has been nowhere close to that, right? And so you cannot expect him. And I'm just saying this in all fairness, right? You have to give Lewis Hamilton all his stars, all his flowers, absolutely. But I cannot sit up here and expect him to be up to speed right away. My point is, it might take him 6, 8 races, which maybe roughly translates to 3 months or so. And I think by that time, Ferrari are going to have to make a decision on whether they're gonna really go for the drivers' championship or not, a la a McLaren papaya rules kind of thing like last year. And I just simply don't see that Lewis will just be able to get up to speed with the car just yet. So yes, he might be quicker, or he might be within a tenth of a half of a tenth or 1,000 or whatever. That's fair. But the eye test also reveals something, and that is that Lewis Hamilton is just not there yet. That's not to say that he won't get there, but he's just not there at this moment in time.
Okay, let's talk about that eye test too. All right, because what we're talking about is we just talked about qualifying because you said that was Lewis's weakness, right? And I'm trying to break down that actually it's not as much of a weakness as you're saying it is. But let's talk about what Lewis's strengths are, right? His strength has always been, especially since the turbo hybrid era and the Pirelli tyre era, really has been his race pace, being able to coax pace out of those fragile Pirelli tyres when they should be falling apart. Getting fastest laps on the final race lap on 50 lap old tyres. So that part of it has never left him. And in fact, on race pace, he has been amongst the best. Just look at what happened in Las Vegas last season. And even if you want to say, all right, George Russell didn't have to push that hard. Go backwards a little bit. Go have a look at Silverstone. You're telling me that that because Lewis hasn't been relevant for a period of time, he's going to have to take time to get back into it. I would say that a 7-time champion, as soon as an opportunity is put in front of them, will make the most of it. My evidence for that last year, Silverstone. As soon as there was even a hint that he was going to win that race, it was leave me alone, Bono. I've got this, and that was against a raging, charging Red Bull of a Max Verstappen. Also, someone that
And
when there
with
is
the
an
George
opportunity,
Russell DNF as well, but yeah.
George was
Yeah, no,
never.
fair. I mean,
George
no,
was
it is
never in
fair.
it, right?
It
George
is
was
fair.
never
I mean,
really in it.
okay. All right.
George was not winning that race. Like, you can go back and have a look at the laps in that race. Like, George, as soon as the rain came
Shez,
along,
you've given me
was
one race,
overtaken.
and there's 75
Fine.
races in
So
the last 3 years. So
but okay. But you are talking about relevance, right? So if
correct.
Ferrari
And I'm
have
saying relevance from a season perspective.
so
Shez, not winning a
Ferrari,
race or two.
yeah. So Ferrari have a car
Mm.
that allows them to compete at the front at all times, then Lewis will take that opportunity, because the one or two times when the car gave him the opportunity across the last 3 seasons, he absolutely took it. That's why he has Belgium and Silverstone in his back pocket last year.
Shez, you know that Belgium was about as technical as it comes. I'm not going to take a win anywhere from anyone, but we have come on here and said that George Russell deserved to win that
I
race.
didn't say that.
You didn't say that?
I didn't say that. I'm pretty
Okay.
sure I didn't say
So, I
that.
mean, George Russell was disqualified on a technicality. You and I have argued how he kept Lewis at bay for lap after lap after lap after lap on those old freaking tires. You know that.
Yes,
You know
yes,
that. So,
yes.
so yes, sure, it is a win, but
should we go back to that, because let's just get into the detail of that. That was
sure.
the race in which they essentially could have done the entire race on one set of tires. So George Russell turning around at the end of it saying, "Oh, look at me, I am a tyre whisperer," was a little bit disingenuous and rubbished at the next few races. Look what he did in Canada. His weakness is still that he can't keep his tyres alive. And one race in Spa doesn't change that. He lucked into a tyre, into a
I'm so glad
track
you said one
surface.
race in Spa doesn't change that. And that's my exact point. One race in Silverstone does
Yeah,
not
agreed,
change
agreed.
three
But
seasons of let's just call it meh performances by Lewis Hamilton. So you can't,
based
that's what I
on based
thank
on
you for
a
saying that.
based on what though? Look, I know that you are not so naive as to think, as any other rookie F1 fan would, that just because a driver is not winning, they are therefore not performing. Like, if that was the
I
case,
didn't say
Fernando
performing.
Alonso would never
I
have
didn't
a
say
job.
performing.
But you are trying.
But no,
But you are
but
trying
here's
to say
you
that.
misunderstood what I said, Chaz. I didn't say that Lewis Hamilton wouldn't be up to speed soon. Well, I actually
You
said Lewis
didn't.
Hamilton
You
wouldn't
in
be up
fact
to
you said
speed soon.
exactly that.
Exactly that. And that there's a difference between saying I didn't say he wouldn't win a race or two. I didn't say that. I
How
said that
much more up to speed can you get?
it would take him 6 to 8 races, roughly 3 months to get up to speed, by which point Ferrari are going to have to make a decision if they've learned anything from what McLaren did last year is are they going to
And
go for a
yeah,
driver's championship or not? That was my point. I never said anything about Lewis Hamilton not being able to win races or not being there. Heck, I could see him by the end of the season if it's wide open for the two drivers for him to beat Charles.
and I would
But
argue the opposite to that. That if there is an opportunity, that he will be putting in the hard work right
okay,
now to
that
be
was
able
not
to
a
get himself
disagreement.
up to speed to the point that if there is a car available for him to take wins, he will take them early. That's what all of preseason testing was. That's what all the chat about being comfortable in the car was. Being able to put forward his suggestions, which he is doing early. They are taking on his feedback
Sure.
now, right? So that gives me some optimism that if there is an opportunity, that Lewis will be there to take it. And my point in pointing out Silverstone and Spa last season, although they are isolated, is that the car was never really there for him to exploit. But the second it was, he was there to pounce on it and to win races. And that is what I
And
think he will be able to do at Ferrari
and
as well.
And I would argue that any feedback that Lewis Hamilton gives is actually going to benefit Leclerc as well, because Leclerc himself has said that the two of them have a very similar
But
driving style. So
I've just shown you on the telemetry
yeah,
that,
but that's testing, Shez. And I just told you that there were weather conditions. They were not testing at the same time. Those are two different times.
but
It's
that
not
is
apples to apples.
that is the best guess we have at the moment.
Okay, but that's only a guess. That's
Yeah,
my
sure.
point. You're right, because one guy went
I
in
am
the
right.
morning and one guy went in the evening and one guy went when the lights were on and the other guy went when the lights weren't on.
Yeah,
We know
we
that
know
this
that the
year
conditions
Bahrain's
were
weather.
we know that the
Huh?
conditions were better in the evening than they were
I
in the
mean, if that's
morning.
the case, then Carlos Sainz is going to be a race winner too. No,
Well, no,
we're not going to
because
do that.
Carlos
Like,
Sainz
I mean,
did his lap in the
but
best
that's
conditions of the
But
day.
that's not, I agree with the telemetry. I just said that it's incomplete data because you
Yeah.
know very well that the conditions were not alike. So you can't compare those two. Now,
Well, I
what you
can.
can
That's
say,
what I just did.
yes, Lewis, I mean, you did that, but that's slightly disingenuous. And you know what you're doing there, but that's fine. I get it. Like that's
Hey,
quite okay
I'm
if
not
you
the
want to do
only
that.
person that's done
I
that
mean,
though. So
listen, I mean, you are not going to be the only one going out on a limb. I mean, look, if you were going to pick between these two drivers, you could hardly go wrong either way. I mean, and so we don't even need to
yeah,
look at
I
any
agree.
data. We could just look at the two of them. Lewis himself has said this is arguably the best pairing in Formula One
Which
for
is
the ages, I think
nonsense.
is what
Which
he
is
said. So,
total
oh,
utter
okay, now we're
gobby
gonna
nonsense.
now you're gonna pump the brakes on
It is
that. But
gobby. Come on. Okay.
testing
Okay.
results were
No, no, no,
good,
no, no,
but
no, no,
now
no.
you're gonna pump the
All
brakes
right.
on that.
Look, best pairing in Formula One history. Tell me with a straight face you
Probably. He
agree with
threw in a
that.
probably in
Oh,
there, Chef.
great. Okay. Probably do you think it's the
That
greatest?
is the equivalent of you saying testing is determining that Lewis
Okay. No, no,
Hamilton
no,
is
no,
up
no.
to
It's
speed with
not.
the car.
There's a
You couldn't even say that
no.
if he was in a Mercedes. Come
Ammar, those are
on.
completely different things. Tell me with a straight face that probably Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton are the greatest driver pairing in Formula One history. Please,
Well, I mean,
I want
I
to see
think
that.
that
Look in the camera and say it.
here's what I think. I think your homeboy there is giving himself too much credit for
Yeah,
that. So that's what he's doing. He's like, now because I'm here, now it's the best pairing. Like
I
I
agree.
get it. I get that's
I think Lewis has been tooting his own horn a little
yes.
too much. That's
He
why I'm trying to cut through the nonsense and just have a look at some of the numbers that are associated with all of this, and they're encouraging. I am
Yeah,
not.
look, I mean,
And
we are splitting hair here, right? And
maybe.
let's be honest, we have no earthly idea how this pairs. I mean, this is the most fascinating thing about this season, right? Is how are the two Ferrari drivers gonna get along in terms of their performance in general, their performance against each other? Can they bring the team ahead and secure a constructors championship? And can they be in the mix? And do it together for a drivers championship. And I think it'll be very fascinating, Shez. And while it's great fun to think about which driver will come ahead, I think this is a headache in the making for Fred Vasseur, right? Because if both drivers are on it, he is going to have a really, really hard time figuring out who to place his proverbial eggs in whichever basket he wants to, because that's going to be a really tough thing for him to figure out. And we're talking about Ferrari here, and I for one am not ready for that. Like I have anyways had so many heart attacks over the last 3 years and before, but really over the last 3 years, like I'm not ready to have any more of those again. So there's a part of me that wishes that only one driver will be far and away ahead of the other, although both would kind of be pulling in the same direction. I certainly would not want to see a teammate battle this year. Like not this year. Like let's win it this year, and then next year we can have it. Like just for 25, can we have something? Let's go after Lando and Max. Let's do that.
There we go. And there it is. Ammar. Ammar is all about Ferrari, not about F1. Right. On that note,
Is that fun?
on that note, we'll call it quits. This time, no wife to try and deliberate for us.
Hasn't watched testing.
But this yes indeed. But this time, you guys let us know. I think I have a fair idea of what the comments are going to say. But surprise me, why not? Please like, please subscribe, please leave us a comment. We'll read every single one. We will reply to as many as we possibly can, and we will see you guys in the next one.
Later.